Thanks. And we're waiting for Marjorie Shu from Sleepy Hollow, who's supposed to be joining. I'd like to give her a minute or two to be able to join, and then we'll start. It's not quite 12 on my clock. On one clock's after 12, one clock it's before 12. I'm not sure. One says 12:03. I'm not sure. But, well, maybe we'll. So, thank you for joining us today, and let me introduce who we are and what we're planning to do today. And that is, with this small group, is go over a publication that we just are releasing, which is our community design guidelines, and it's in support of the old Croton Aqueduct State Historic Park. And what we want to do is roll these guidelines out. Marjorie Shu, thank you for joining us. Right.
I'm getting quite an echoey kind of sound.
So
is there a way to remedy that?
If everybody goes to mute and only the person speaking, it will probably, the echo should go away.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. We were waiting for you.
Wow,
So
I feel privileged.
It's a very small group. And in fact, we may go around and introduce ourselves a little bit before we got, because it's such a small group. We'd like to make sure that everybody is on the line. So I'm Linda Cooper, and I am the regional director here at State Parks in the Aqueduct region.
I'll go in the back room.
And if everybody could go on mute, and unless they're speaking, that would be helpful.
How do I go on mute?
On a
Can
phone.
I go on mute for this?
Usually it's a
Anyone
star
calling, be
6.
sure to mute your speakers.
Right. Are you on a phone, or are you on a computer? Down at the bottom of the screen, if you're on a visual, and you should have a visual for this presentation because it's a PowerPoint presentation, down on the very bottom of the picture on the screen, there should be buttons, and one of them says mute at the far left. And if you click that, it will mute you.
I think I also have mute powers. So.
Okay. I was going to say you can do that as well. So as I started to say, I'm Linda Cooper. I oversee the Taconic region for state parks and historic preservation, recreation, historic preservation, and obviously the old Croton Aqueduct State Historic Park is part of our region, which is Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess, and Columbia counties. I live in Westchester, and some of you I have worked with in other capacities when I was the village manager in Ossining and the town supervisor in Yorktown, and a member of the Westchester Municipal Planning Federation, as I have an AICP along with Paige Barnum, our parks planner. So this project is near and dear to our hearts because it's all about trying to put another tool in the toolbox for everybody to assist with our planning decisions and evaluation of proposals and designs that come in. And in this case, those proposals that come in that have an impact on the Old Croton Aqueduct, either because of adjacency or near adjacency. And what we found is that, with the 26 miles that are inside Westchester of this 41-mile beautiful engineering marvel, each community, there's some rural communities, there's some suburban communities, and some urban communities, and each community was looking at the aqueduct in its own way. And we thought if we could bring together the sort of the different best practices of what's going on and be able to share them with everybody and really look at the aqueduct for the treasure that it is, that we would be able to enhance and perpetuate this linear corridor that, in particular during this time of pandemic, has had an even greater role in our communities than it had, and it had a great role for years and years. So it's we're looking to see how to collaborate and guide and share our vision and put together tools that we've collected in part from each of the different communities, and want to see them as members of land use boards change. Marjorie, you're the current chair of the planning board in Sleepy Hollow, but that board evolves and changes and people are on there. And so some people know of the Aqueduct and some don't. And I think it was a year or two ago, we were looking at some boards that had no idea what the Aqueduct was like. And we realized, you need, sometimes the institutional knowledge doesn't carry it through. So we've created this book. We spent a bit of time putting it together and having meetings with the municipalities. And I will admit, Chris, Kia, that the one municipality we didn't get in was Cortland, but it has the most rural aspects. So we sort of figured we would catch up with you at this time. So I thought this might actually be a good time before we go into it, since we are such a small group, to identify who's on the call and we'll start with our own staff. Paige, could you identify yourself and then go to Steve?
Yeah, I'm Paige Barnum. I'm a planner with State Parks. I'm based out of the Albany office. I essentially split the state in half from Syracuse and come east. That's my assigned range for planning purposes, but I really enjoy working with Linda. As she suggested, we're both planners, so it's always exciting to, work with like minds.
Thank you. And Steve? Steve, can you say who you are? Where are you? Oh, he must have fallen off. So we'll catch him when he comes back, when he taps back in, but Steve Oakes is the manager.
I was muted, I'm sorry. I'm the park manager of the Aqueduct, the full of the park, responsible for pretty much whatever happens here, and then keeping an eye out for what may go on in the future and so on. My office is in Dobbs Ferry, and I'm here pretty much every day.
Thank you, Steve. And we just, since again we're such a small group, and we have several members of the Friends of the Old Croton Aqueduct on this today. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself? And Sarah, we're doing a story on Sarah that's coming out in our next month's edition. That you're sitting there. Can't believe you were general counsel of the FDIC during the 2008 crash of the banks, and she's one of our lead tour guides. It's like, oh my goodness. So Sarah,
it's all about leading people. So I am co-head of walks and tours for the Friends of the Old Croton Aqueduct. So I've spent a lot of time on the trail, and I really applaud this effort, and I'm happy to be here today to watch it roll out.
Thanks. And Leslie?
I am on the board of the Friends. I deal with docents at the house, although I think in the future I'm going to be dealing more with the trail and how to support the trail. And I work closely with Steve and Sarah, both.
That's great. I don't think there are any other friends on. Chris, or did I miss this? Any other friend on?
Yes, Leola Beck. I'm a friend from the Old Croton Aqueduct, a docent at the Keeper's House, and I head up the Irvington Invasive Removal Squad. We've removed invasives along the Old Croton Aqueduct. And I love the trail, walk and bike on there a lot.
Oh, thanks, Leona. That's the problem when I can only see call-in user 2 or 244. It's harder to know who's there. I apologize. Chris Kia, want to identify yourself?
Sure. Portland.
Oh, it's too. We can barely hear you.
Oh, sorry. Let me see. Is this any better?
A little bit.
I'll be brief.
We're not getting you.
I can't make out what you're saying.
So Chris Keogh is the planner for the town of Cortland, and he and I have served together on the Westchester Municipal Planning Federation. He is a longtime planner in the county of Westchester and very well regarded. So thank you for joining us on the call. And then
Hi, Linda. Linda, can you hear me? It's Charlotte.
I can, Charlotte. And then before we circle back to Charlotte, Marjorie Shu, would you introduce yourself?
I just want to be on record as being here, a longtime board member until very recently, and I've had a hand in pretty much everything the Friends do, and I'm project manager for our maps and guides.
Great, that's Charlotte Fong. Okay, that's Charlotte. So I can't see your name here either. You're on it. Marjorie?
Hi, Marjorie Shu. I live in Sleepy Hollow. I'm chair of the planning board, as Linda mentioned. I'm sorry, I can't turn my camera on. I just downloaded Big Sur to my Apple computer, and it's requiring me to change all my system preferences. We are, yeah, oh, technology. Through my husband, who used to run on the OCA before he wrecked his knee, we're also friends of the OCA, and living here, we take full advantage of the aqueduct. And I really appreciate Linda joining our public hearings back when we were dealing with one of our applications whose property is adjacent to the OCA. So anyway,
thanks so much for joining us. And so that's really, we have a small group here. So what we would like to do is we're going to run through a fairly short presentation, and then open for some discussion as to next steps. But since we all know, and I think, Paige, what you probably should do is mute everybody so that it is fully muted until we go to questions, so that we don't have, and then I hope you did. Am I muted or I'm unmuted, right? Okay, and then there is a chat box. Does everybody know how to use the chat box? Down on the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box. So if you have a question or something you want right at a particular time before we get to the end for real Q&A, just pop it into the chat box, and we can get to it at the end of the end of the discussion. So that would be, I think, the best way. Can you see Paige just put in the chat box that everyone has been muted? Okay. So again, these are community design guidelines. Our purpose is to kind of guide and inform the different municipalities with the different tools that are out there, planning tools that are out, and some are being used by the municipalities, various municipalities, and others are just sort of standard good guidance that are being used around the country. And we are hoping that we've created a small enough document that it will be of use, and could perhaps be incorporated into either comprehensive plans or planning guidelines, or just used as a reference, but that it would actually manage to have some staying power and become a useful document as applications come in that surround or could impact the aqueduct. So we're going to go through it, and then we'll open for questions. Next page. So, Steve?
Yeah, so what is the aqueduct? Well, in essence, it's a footpath. It's a 26-mile state historic park managed by the Taconic region of New York State Parks. It runs from the Croton Dam in the town of Cortland all the way down through Yonkers into to the Bronx line in Van Cortlandt Park. And it attracts, it's tough to count trails, but pretty clearly thousands of visitors due to its proximity to towns, to its visual qualities, and its historic nature. Now, the aqueduct has a sort of an interesting history. It was a response to a public health problem, basically. New York City had largely, unusable water supply, insufficient for both domestic use and firefighting. And what little they had was largely polluted. City fathers determined that wells were basically not going to work, and that an aqueduct of some kind was needed. They selected the Croton River, as far away as it was, as a place that had sufficient flow year-round of good quality water, and opted to build an aqueduct starting in 1838. They chose a gravity system, fairly simple. Remember, this came kind of at the heels of the era of canal building. So you had the Erie Canal of 360 miles. So a 40-mile aqueduct, basically a covered canal, was not an impossibility. It was designed to last for a century, was the thinking, as it would supply water sufficient to New York City for 100 years. They started out using only about 30 million gallons a day. It was capable of providing 100 million. The problem was it kind of was a victim of its own success in that New York City was able to grow because it had water. Population increased dramatically, and probably by 1865, the city folks determined that it's going to need a replacement. So the new Croton Aqueduct was built in starting in 1880 through 1910 or so. The original Croton Aqueduct became the old Croton Aqueduct. And it was still used, not very much, but providing all of 2% of New York's water by the time it was taken out of service in the mid-1960s. Now, as a piece of the aqueduct is essentially a piece of municipal infrastructure that was kind of finger snapped, and it turned into a state park. Keeping it enjoyable for patrons is something that does have some challenges. One of the challenges is development adjacent to it. It can affect the landscape right around it. It can affect the view shed. Another kind of preservation challenge is actually the maintenance of the historic structure. The aqueduct includes retaining walls, slope walls, structures, the actual tunnel itself, which is still there. There's a lot to be maintained, and that takes a fair amount of effort on our part. The fact that municipalities all have different rules for how close one can build to it and so on can make it a little bit trickier. An important method of ensuring preservation of it is really to get the word out, to educate the public that it's not just an undeveloped road. There are structural issues with the aqueduct that can be affected by adjacent development. We've had blasting, where we've had to do seismic monitoring on the aqueduct. There's equipment that may need to cross it. For example, in Hastings now, the building of a park requires the crossing of the aqueduct by heavy equipment. There's a lot that needs to be done to keep on top of the actual structural integrity of the aqueduct. We've got an issue going on presently at Lyndhurst regarding a road they want to be able to bring heavy equipment over, and it's not feasible right now. Paige?
Paige, you're on mute. Unmute.
There we go. All right. You'd think I'd have a handle on this after almost a year, but all right. So what are design guidelines? I'm sure most of you know, but for anyone that watches this recording after, we'll lay it out. So design guidelines are written recommendations that are intended to give folks such as, local officials, planning board members, architects, homeowners, clear advice on how to employ best practices and principles of architecture, design, and planning on a project-by-project basis. And you're well aware we have folks from all sorts of communities on this call, so that project-by-project basis tends to be really important. Generally speaking, design guidelines are developed after a careful study of the area. Now, that area could be as small as one historic district. It could be a larger neighborhood or a subdivision, or it might even be citywide. Guidelines are intended to be flexible, and it's our hopes that they encourage creativity in design. The flexibility of the guidelines and their adaptability helps everyone ensure that we don't end up with, homogeneous cookie cutter development. because we want to protect and not forsake the characteristics of your communities that made them a special place worthy of protecting in the first place. And so it's our hope that the OCA guidelines will regularly be reviewed by local planning boards in your community, architectural review boards, preservation commissions, and that the recommendations will be considered in the decision-making process. It's well established in the field of planning and architecture that judicious application of design guidelines when issuing project approvals leads to better outcomes. Decisions made after consideration of the design guidelines not only enhance architectural traditions, they can introduce new ones without detracting, from the OCA. And then this way we don't end up with, haphazard or unanticipated project outcomes. So next, there we go, gotta click, there we go. So Linda talked a little bit about our document development. We started this process in the middle of fall 2019, which seems like a whole nother lifetime. That October, we met with local officials and village managers, some public works superintendents, members of some of the historic district commissions, and others to explain our priorities for designing this document. And also we met to sort of shed some light on why we felt, this is important and we wanted the towns to really sort of adopt it. We also hope to identify through these conversations if there were any particular concerns in each community that this document might help to address. Subsequent to those meetings, we got to design guidelines. We edited the document, we took comment from our subject matter experts here at State Parks, particularly folks in the Division of Conservation. And so then now, February 2020, we sent along an early draft of this document to the folks we met with the previous fall. Bear with me, I'm getting some feedback. My new options here. All right. So the document's unique in that it strives to give guidance to many municipalities. And while each of your communities has different values and different issues, the one thing you do all have in common is an interest in protecting the OCA and promoting it to your visitors so that they can appreciate it as a resource in their own backyard. So now here we are, beginning of 2021. And it's a bit later than we anticipated, but I don't think any of us saw a global pandemic coming. But as I'm sure you're well aware, traffic on the OCA has never been higher as folks try to get outside and recreate safely in the outdoors.
Recreate.
So now, how to use this document. So as you can see, step one here is to identify the environmental setting in which the proposed project takes place. So what do I mean by environmental setting? So, well, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to impart a short and hopefully painless urban planning theory lesson. I like school. Hopefully you liked school too, and you're gonna enjoy this little history lesson here. So what you see on screen here, this diagram, is called the urban-rural transect. And that's a planning model that was developed in the early 2000s by architects/urban planners Andres Duwani and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg. Their model was inspired by the field of ecology, where naturalists frequently study changes in habitat over a gradient. So that change might come across topography, it might be a distance from a water body to the next. But what was really important about the urban-rural transect was that it defined 7 zones, and each of those zones had their own unique characteristics. These characteristics usually encompass typical land uses and activities, as well as the extent of physical development in that zone. So the diagram's goal here is in part to show the interconnection between human development and the natural environment, how development can ebb and flow, and how it's not something that just happens in isolation. So how does this concept apply to the OCA, you might ask? Well, it really influenced our design guidelines, because what we did is we took this concept of the urban-rural transect and we applied it to the extent of the OCA. And in that way, we came up with 5 of our own environments or settings that were specific to communities along the OCA. So again, step one, where we are identifying the environmental setting where a project is proposed, requires consulting and hopefully looking at the design guidelines and figuring out which of our 5 settings that project site fits into. And then using the document recommendations to apply those best practices and standards to that project site. So I will turn it back over to Steve now.
All right, well, you see 4 environmental settings here. We'll explain the 5th as we move along. The first one is a natural landscape. That exists in several areas along the trail. I mean, it's certainly a lot of it way up north, but there are also sections of this in Yonkers. There are natural sections throughout the trail. They're basically marked by, they're places that have not had a whole lot of recent human activity or disturbance. They may have always been that way because they're just uneconomic to develop. They may have been used for completely different uses we don't have around here anymore, such as, grazing of animals, and then have been fallow since then. And, but nevertheless, they're basically undisturbed at this point in time. And as I say, they exist quite a bit. The terrain plays a big deal in Yonkers. The next level, working rural to urban, is the suburban landscape. And that we all probably are pretty familiar with. Houses separated a bit. The Aqueduct Trail often, either forms a boundary to a backyard, melds into the backyard, is used as a backyard. But it's, a good bit of the trail is described as a suburban landscape. The village center is a little bit more developed. Right there is Ossining. You can see the red trail there going right through the center of the village. Many of these villages were there when the aqueduct was built, 1838 to 1842. The land use in these areas is very different. Buildings tend to be closer together and closer to the aqueduct itself. Adjacent roads are very often heavily traveled, busy, and so on. Transit in a lot of these communities is there. It brings up a lot of visitors to the park from the big city. And the next one we've got is a more urban environment. We characterize as city center. That's a picture of Wicker Street down in Yonkers. Generally not a whole lot in the way of single family residences. They may still be there, but for the most part, it's apartment buildings, high land values, dense development. If there is open space, it's either because it's a park or it's under development or whatever. But by and large, it's an area that is characterized by essentially large developments, commercial, retail, and residential along the trail, frequently on both sides. Final, the outlier, the number 5, is the special districts, which are kind of incongruous, the stepchild in a way. They're things that frequently were permitted back when the aqueduct was municipal infrastructure and its appearance did not matter a whole lot. Most of these special districts are parking lots. We've got them in Irvington, Dobbs Ferry, Hastings. They very often take up the entire width of the trail. There are other areas where there are detours, where land has been lost. An enormous one in Yonkers, going from Yonkers Avenue over to Midland Avenue, where the Sawmill Parkway, Cross County Parkway, Yonkers Avenue, and so on have just essentially obliterated the aqueduct. They're the same thing just a little bit east of the former toll booths or the bridge over Route 9 or Route 9 bridge over the thruway in Tarrytown, where the aqueduct, the trail just leads to a sound deadening wall, and one's got to then walk around to get to a continuation of the trail. Some of these special districts parking lots are on the periphery of the trail. They don't really impact it that much. We've got a fair number of those in Yonkers. There'll be an apartment building that might use 20 feet out of the 66 feet for a parking lot. half the time, I don't think patrons are even aware that that is an incursion on state land. Almost all of these pay a fee for the use. The parking lots for municipalities, the fee is inconsequential. For some of the others, it can be of some substance. But that's pretty much our way we've divided up the aqueduct. I think that the majority of the aqueduct could be fit into one of these categories, and consequently development in that kind of neighborhood, is going to be different from another type of neighborhood. That's what we're hoping to create here. So moving back to page.
Always with the unmute. We had contractors in here earlier, so there was like lots of sanding. So I'm always like afraid there's gonna be lots of noise. But all right, so part 2 of how to use design guidelines. So once you've identified the environmental setting that the project you're reviewing or considering developing takes place in, you will consult the guidelines, which for each of those environmental areas give some specific things to watch out for. Anything from landscaping treatments to lot coverage allotments, all in hopes of respecting the defining qualities of the setting and the OCA. The thing folks needs to watch out for are really varied by each environmental setting. So we don't delve, into the specific recommendations of each setting in this presentation, but we do encourage people to be accustomed with the document and the characteristics of each environmental setting, so that when you are in position to issue a board ruling or do some work in advance of submitting an application to your local municipality, you're best informed on how your project can sort of hopefully seamlessly get through the approval process because it was conscientious of the OCA. So after a board or officials have sized up a project and relative to the quintessential attributes of that environmental setting, we encourage the board to go to the next part of the OCA guidelines document, which just talk about general design principles. And so I'm going to do a quick review of those sort of design standards and preface it with the fact that I am not an architect, so I may slip up on a term here or there. But so the first design principle that we'd ask folks to consider when they're looking at proposals is setback, which is the distance between a building or an accessory structure and the state park line. You can see that there with some of the arrows between the shrubbery and the imaginary property line. The next design principle that is sort of a design 101 is scale, which is the relative or apparent size of a building in relation to something else. So for us, it oftentimes are, commercial buildings, or in this image, it's residential architecture, and how does that architecture make you feel when you're on the trail. The next design principle is height. Again, demarcated with an arrow. I don't think I need to explain height so much. The next design principle is massing, which is the perception of shape, form, size of a building. So the best way to think about massing is if you're here walking on the trail, does that building feel like it's really looming over you? Does it make it feel like an unwelcome space? How might you be able to set back different stories on your structure to make it feel not such an imposing piece of development adjacent to the trail? Next, we have facade composition, which is essentially the primary or secondary face of your structure and the arrangements of different openings, such as windows, very related to rhythm. The next design principle there, which, how might your windows be scaled in proportion on the building? Are they in a sort of sensical placement on the structure? And last but not least, and this one is very important, obviously, is view shed preservation. As we know, those scenic views from not only when you're on the Hudson itself, but when you're on the trail looking at the Hudson are very rare and very special. So we try to be very diligent, but encouraging people to be mindful of protecting, those sort of visual windows to the different landscapes along the trail. Now I will turn it back over to Linda, and she can talk about what governments can really specifically do to sort of help us out to steward the trail.
Thanks, Paige. many of the municipalities are engaging, every few years you engage in an update of the comprehensive plan. It would be great if, at least by reference, this is an included document in that plan, so that as part of an appendices or something, so that it becomes incorporated into, or at least picking out the concepts that work best for your community. But whatever, ideally a full reference to the document, but you want to make sure that you've read it and agreed to that. If you use the local design guidelines, want to put it into your zoning ordinance, you want to put it in by reference or incorporation as a whole. Any kind of amendments that are appropriate to how the given boards are dealing with the aqueduct that you see that are from the document would be great to again incorporate, so that they have the gravitas of law or regulation in there. And again, working with us if there are appropriate parcels that you think need to be acquired or easements that should be placed on properties that are adjacent to the aqueduct, to work with us to secure those and to recommend those for those that you think are important for the preservation of this long-term, nationally landmarked state park resource. And the aqueduct story is such an incredible one, and I know that Sarah can speak to it probably better than I can in many ways as she leads the walks and tours. But whether we're telling the story of water and using it as a basis for water quality, and how water got to New York, or how it's the basis for the growth of New York City, or whether it's the actual engineering aspects of having this first gravity-fed facility that brought clean water to New York. If we look at the masonry, at the immigration stories, if we look at people stories behind it, if we, the design stories, the plant stories, what plants have actually evolved and are on the aqueduct, and the connectivity to our river towns. It plays a role in the river towns, and even has had movies filmed on it, and famous ones. So there's so many different stories and ways that the aqueduct intertwines with our cultural legacy, our history, as well as being a linear park. And what we have found is it's not always treated as a park. And our goal is to have the passion that we feel for the park embraced by all of the land use boards, tempered by obviously what the community's goals are, but we're hoping that the community's goals can in fact incorporate a passion for preservation and development that is in keeping with the aqueduct. And that's really why we put this together. And we're hoping that it can be of use, and it should be a dynamic document. And if there are changes in the rules and regulations that the boards are doing, or somebody comes up with something that's not in here, we should update it. And so we would love to know and make it dynamic. So with that, I actually, we would love your, forgot there are more pages here. So of course, any project that comes through, and those of you who've been in Ossining, that's where you can enter the weir. And if you haven't done it, I strongly recommend it. We'll get you on a tour. Sarah will get you on a tour. But every project that goes, that is around near the aqueduct has to go through seeker, and all seeker reviews should be identifying the OCA as a historic resource. And toward that end, the state gets the opportunity to comment. And I know we regularly get the letters. We actually do look at them, and I send them routinely to Steve, who will locate whatever I think we just got a Hastings letter in, and we get them pretty regularly, and we chart what's going on and whether there's an impact. And it also goes up to our state historic preservation office for review. And we just appreciate your ensuring that your board clerks know the requirement to notify the state on any applications that come through near the aqueduct. next. Again, the 1409, which is that section of law out of the Department of Interior that says that everything that's nationally landmarked and that this old needs to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Office. Essentially the same thing under the National Historic Preservation Act. Now, by the way, even though Croton Dam is in the county park, we basically take it as our own. Not so much for funding or operation, but since the actual Aqueduct Trail starts inside the Croton Gorge Park, we are, we use the image a lot because you have to start there to go on. And Sarah has already started a discussion of seeing whether or not the fountain can be re-engaged that's down at the Croton Gorge Park. And I think through her, just by Henry Neal and her asking the question, I think it's actually going to happen. So it's pretty amazing. So there's, it's amazing what people can do. So thoughts, questions, we can take you off mute, but there was a lot of background noise. Why don't you take everybody off mute and let's just see if we have any questions. It'll be pretty informal with this one. We're so small a group. Paige. Paige, can you?
This is Leola from Irvington. I have a question.
Okay. What is it?
Regarding their design guidelines, I know in Irvington, a group of citizens did an incredible job with historic guidelines that no one seems to even know about or adhere to at all. So when you speak of guidelines, how much is required and how much is a suggestion?
So we're the state. Westchester County is New York State is a home rule state. So these are guidelines. So this is not required. There's nobody that will. We have some authority under seeker and under that 1409 of the Historic Preservation Act, but we are not mandating that anybody follow these. We met with the municipalities, and Chris Keogh, my apologies into Cortland. We were doing them over 2 days, and we just couldn't squeeze it in to get up to get, because it was keeping Paige downstate. We just couldn't squeeze the time in, and we never got back to calling on you and Linda Puglisi. But we, when we met with all of the municipalities, expressed interest and support for the guidelines when we met with them. So, and we felt that Cortland would be right there as well, given their background in being a strong protector of the aqueduct all along.
But to Leola's question, they really have no teeth. And that's where we really need the assistance of the municipalities.
But they're not meant to have teeth. They're meant to be guidelines. The municipalities determine what is appropriate in their municipalities. This is a tool. Just as the Municipal Planning Federation primers for planning boards and zoning boards and architectural review boards is. So we're adding a resource and hoping that the guidelines provide some ability for reference, and people can say, okay, we know what direction the state would like us to take this in, or we know what direction might be prudent or useful for us to think about as we make determinations. And maybe Chris, I know we had trouble hearing you, but if you or Marjorie could perhaps give a sense of how this might help or not for your boards.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of simple. I have both a laptop and an old-fashioned desktop, and I was screaming at the desktop without opening up my laptop. So I apologize for that. Just to remind everybody that I'm the town planner in Cortland and worked with Linda on various projects for years. And what Paige was talking about with the rural urban transact, we would be, T1, T2 in our part of town, very rural. It's 2-acre residential zoning. Not a heck of a lot goes on down there. However, the Danish home, which is very close to the trail, is closing. So there will be possible implications with that. We also have a large alcohol and drug treatment center at an old facility known as the Hudson Institute, sort of near the trail. So we do have land use implications in that part of town. As Linda probably knows, that part of town sometimes gets lost. A lot of people think it's Croton. I mean, it has some Croton zip codes and Croton school districts down there. So in some respects, the fact that it's so quiet is a good thing. But in other respects, we've got to keep an eye on it. And, we have an active planning board. We adopt master plans every 10 years. So, we keep an eye on things pretty well. But as has been stated, these are guidelines and they're only as good as the reviewing authority is willing to use them.
So do you think,
follow up to
Chris,
that? I just wondered what was planned to make sure that these things are in front of the planning boards and the residents or whoever when they think about development around it. Like, what steps are planned to disseminate the information?
well, this is one, we've mailed them to all of the municipalities, or emailed them to all the municipalities, and we are holding these webinars, and then we've offered to go do presentations to the boards of any of the different municipalities, and some of the municipalities have already contacted us to take us up on that. So we would like to be able to at least put it out there. We'd try to put it into the libraries as well, so that it's a public document that others may be able to refer to. And we're open to suggestions as to what. There was a press release that went out on it. I know there was some pickup on it. Although interesting, I think WAMC, which is but is up here. It's that's in Albany and Columbia County and Rensselaer County. Ran a small piece on it on their public radio station, but I don't know if it ran on anything down in the area.
Yeah, my wife heard it in Dutchess County.
Right. So Chris,
Great. So let us know how we can help get the word out.
Okay, thank you. Chris, any thoughts in terms of, how this should roll out in Cortland, or whether it be useful, or sit down with Supervisor Puglisi or with your planning board chairs, or what?
I had notified, not to throw anybody under the bus, but I had notified our planning board of the ability to come to this event and listen. No one took me up on it. I did provide them the document. I can reach back out. We have certain planning board members, Linda, that you're probably aware of, that would be very interested in a discussion on something as this topic. I can reach back out. But I think we're lucky in Cortland, not to toot my own horn, but municipalities that have on-staff planners usually are a little more in tune with these documents than municipalities that have to use consulting firms. So we'll keep the municipal boards aware of this document. And as I said, at least in Cortland, not too much happens in that part of town. But the thing that's on our radar is the Danish home. Will be the big thing that we've got to keep an eye on. And our board will, be aware of this document.
Thank you so much, Chris. You do a fabulous job, and thank you that's one of the reasons we weren't worried.
Okay.
But we would like it to be a tool that's useful there if it can. And there's a lot going on. The Croton Board's unique area has its own plan that was created. That's at the base of the aqueduct in Cortland, and it has a very active neighborhood community that's sort of taking a look at the institutional uses as they change in the nearby. And one of the Friends of the Croton Aqueduct members that lives along there has been active in promoting the I Love My Park Day invasive vine removal in the Cortland area as well. So that is, so we really appreciate that. Marjorie, what about Sleepy Hollow? Glad to see you said you function as the architectural review board as well.
Yeah, I found out about this webinar through Anthony, our town supervisor. There's obviously a huge interest in historical preservation, and recently I think we've become increasingly passionate about urban forest management and tree inventories. And so the OCA is very much a part of that, with, kind of rural as well as suburban intersections with our town. So the person who asked, like, how will this be disseminated or managed, and obviously there is no enforcement from New York State. There's just so much information out there, right? It's voluminous, and a lot of it is going to be on individuals, homeowners, and village staff, as well as the boards, to seek out the information and then to partner with New York State for guidance. And I assume will continue to be available to us even as we're going through various applications and referencing this design guideline.
Great. And then just let us know if you want us to do any further presentations within the community. And thanks to Anthony for sending that along. Sleepy Hollow is in an interesting position right now, especially with the General Motors plant, area going in for redevelopment. And there are an awful lot of, there's a committee being that we've been part of, that's a trails committee for Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown, but they're specifically looking at trail connections throughout the community and how to ensure that the river and Rockefeller State Park Preserve and the Tarrytown Lakes and all of the surrounding open spaces, Kingsland Point, and all of the areas are connected. And again, the old Croton Aqueduct is that existing corridor that kind of comes through it all from south end, from north end to south end, or south end to north end, and then the other trails kind of crisscross. And we're very close to, with the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge, the old Tappan Zee Bridge, with the Empire State Trail coming across there. Again, the offshoots of the bicycle trail as it goes along in Tarrytown, will go along Route 119 and Benedict Avenue. But there's an opportunity for people to split off and come on the Riverwalk and to come on the old Croton Aqueduct and get into the local communities to have lunch, or when we get back to having that kind of normalcy, but to visit the local communities. And I think that, again, all of these corridors are becoming increasingly not just important, but understood and used. I know when I was a few months ago, I went to the bridge and rode across and had lunch in Nyack. You come back, people do all the time. People are now combining a visit and a dinner with a walk on a trail, a walk on the Riverwalk down at Tarrytown, or I could see them going to the little restaurants in Sleepy Hollow and then walking down to the river, or deciding to walk back up into Rockefeller if it's during the day. So we're hopeful that this will be of use. And thank you also to the friends of the Croton Aqueduct members that joined the call. We have another call Thursday evening. So we did a nighttime one, and we are, as we've mentioned, happy to come into communities and do smaller targeted discussions with any groups that want to have it explained to them or understand how to use it. So.
And I would add too, another opportunity we have to ensure that, this document isn't just, whatever the composition of the boards are in each of the municipalities right now, that, as people hop on, hop off, one thing we can do to, help ensure that it's not just forgotten by, sort of unique group of appointees is, encourage municipalities when they onboard their new, board members, when they, give them the local land use code, however they go about it, is, also include this document with that information packet, so that everyone does have a copy of it. It's just another way to sort of ensure that there is a legacy of this document, and that it's not just it doesn't live and die by one planning board member chair.
Right, and
we are updating our zoning, revisiting it as the first step in the implementation of our comprehensive plan in Sleepy Hollow. And I think it's very important to get updated guidelines institutionalized into our code so that, you know, it's not just up to the ambitious board member or whatever that's, you know, seeking out guidelines, but that it's baked into the code wherever possible, which is much more enforceable.
Absolutely. We would very much appreciate if that's possible. That would be a tremendous goal for us. And, you know, so that's, and to the extent we can help in any of those things or explain them, we're happy to come in and be part of those presentations. And I know Hastings Planning Board is coming on. Somebody from Hastings, Dobbs Ferrier signed up for tomorrow night. But Leona, you said you were from Irvington. We do not have anybody from Irvington's planning signed up. So if you
so
reach
maybe
out.
I should do some nudging. Thank you. That's my concern, is that, you know, with this great historic document that, you know, guidelines that Irvington has, but people don't know about it or look at it. So I just want to make sure we're always out there and considered, you know, when development is considered.
All right. So Sarah's asked whether we're reaching out to school districts as well. Probably that's a good idea. Certainly the Sleepy Hollow School District has actually been one of our more problematic development issues. I don't know whether you're aware of this, Marjorie, but when they just like shut off access to the trail without notifying us when they, you know, at one point, and then when they put their building on another part of the trail, and we recognize there's the need to deal with the school campus, but there was also some courtesy in starting, and they should have worked with the state a little bit better. So we're going to, you know, that's a good idea, Sarah, to make sure that the school superintendents who border it, and we do have several schools besides Sleepy Hollow who border the aqueduct should be apprised of it.
I have a 1 o'clock, so I'm going to drop off, but thank you for this overview.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care, everyone. Okay. Bye-bye.
And then there's one more question from Leslie about whether, so the drug center, here's a question for Chris Keogh about whether or not the people that are coming, the rehabilitation center that's being proposed for the Hudson Institute would use the trail. I would, and that's been a problem with that in Yonkers. I think it's probably, I mean, I kick it into Chris, but it's probably premature. They haven't even gotten approval. But Chris, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, that's been going on for 5 years and several lawsuits, although they have progressed to the point now where they're back in front of the planning board and getting pretty close, you know, to having the review continue on. I guess in the grand scheme of things, they're not too far away from the trail, but, you know, sort of more site specific. They are a little far away from the trail. They've been talking about walking on their own property. They have an adjacent piece of property in Newcastle for walking and creating a system of walking trails. The Aqueduct Trail hasn't come up in any of the discussions yet. So I don't know, you know, it's so controversial that I don't know if it hasn't come up in the context of people using it as a feature as part of their rehabilitation, because so many people oppose the project.
No, thank you. We have had the problem where I've brought Yonkers officials down to walk that part of the trail, and the mess, I mean, it's just an urban mess that they've seen on the trail has kind of, I don't know, turned them off. It's been hard to interest local officials in cleaning up that much of a mess. That's all.
But are you talking about people who are coming from a rehabilitation center, or just people who are using drugs on the aqueduct?
I think it's people coming from the rehab center. I don't think it's active drug use, although you never can rule that out in Yonkers.
Okay, great. I was unaware of that too. So maybe you could show me which rehab center, and we can maybe find out if we can meet with them.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. What else? There's one more question here. Will the document contain, this is from Sarah, contain information on what's actually owned and shouldn't be subject to trespass, such as the fence behind Untermeyer? So what our goal, Sarah, here is this is mostly for design guidelines. Once we finish rolling this out, the encroachment issue is huge on the aqueduct, and to the extent that anybody on the phone or on the call is aware of some in areas that you have jurisdiction on, to the extent you can help us. Our goal is to bit by bit remove most of the encroachments from the aqueduct and return it to a trail. We've generally tried to do that when we have money to be able to rehabilitate the section and turn it into something reasonable, as was done at between Bishop Wallace Place and Lamartine Avenue in Yonkers. But where we don't have money, it's harder to do that. There are areas, particularly in Tarrytown, which is probably I would say the very next of the areas that we want to target, where people have put fences on and made gardens and extended patios where we are just going to try and get them off. There's no adverse possession. It's not part of their ownership, and we need to just move them off. And Steve has our full blessing to go ahead and do that. It's just, he's one of the 3 employees on the aqueduct. It's just been a time-consuming thing to do. But to the extent anybody wants to help us in that effort, that is next on our hit parade after we get the design guidelines is encroachments. And we started encroachments earlier. We got some success, then we pulled back a little. We have a list of them. There are more than 200 encroachments that I believe we have documented.
Bravo to that.
So, all right. Anyway, I don't want to keep people longer. Anything else,
Sorry,
Charlotte?
just wondered how wide the trail is supposed to be. How do you measure encroachment?
So the trail is generally around 60 feet, but not always. And one of the issues that we had is we had requested funds to do a survey. It's well over $1 million probably, so we didn't get it given the state's fiscal situation. So in each section that we do the encroachment, we do have to do a survey when we try to go to enforcement. So that's part of the issue, is that there's an expense. So we have to show the justification that we in fact do own it and that they're over it. Steve, do you want to pipe in?
No, you pretty much got it. I mean, for the most part, it's 1 chain in width in the old measuring lingo, so 66 feet, or it crosses ravines and valleys, it might be 200, 300 feet. Generally, we don't extend a whole lot beyond the base of any retaining wall, which I think will cause more trouble in the future as development leads right up, really stresses the value of setbacks. But, like Linda said, we don't have surveys, so it's awful tough to say, you're on our land. It takes a little bit of assurance before we can go say that.
So one of the other reasons for this, by the way, is we do find that as buildings and things come right up to the edge of the aqueduct, that there are true engineering issues. Besides, we don't want the tunnel effect. We don't want the structural integrity compromised. We're working right now on 2 locations on the aqueduct, one of which was compromised because somebody dug out an area and put a playground in. And years ago, not even, I'm sure, not the current users of the land, but nonetheless, that impacts in the future, and it's going to impact, substantial money to fix. And we are trying to be conscious of, where problems have occurred. And when water isn't treated properly in a land use review, and water somehow ends up on the aqueduct, again, that causes issues with the structural integrity of the site. So we have, lots of reasons to pay close attention to what's there. Any other questions or thoughts? Paige, wrap up? Anything?
I think that's it. Encourage everyone that on other boards or maybe interested to attend tomorrow night, 6 p.m. is when we're hosting it. Or if they can't make that, we will put both these meeting recordings online for viewing.
And thank you so much. And thank you for your support of the Aqueduct and our project.
Yes, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody, for your work
Thank
on
you.
this. Excellent.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You too. Bye.
Good afternoon. Bye.
Good job.